the talk of the tune. Hi, my name is Danny Hansen, and you are about to hear a conversation I had with Dr. Brian Lamb, a conductor of wind ensembles. Since 2001, Brian has served as director of bands at University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, Oklahoma. Prior to this appointment, he was assistant professor of music at Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri. He holds degrees from University of North Texas, University of Notre Dame, and Baylor University. Brian has traveled the world with the University of Central Oklahoma Wind Symphony, has conducted world, state, and regional premieres of pieces by notable composers, and has taught conducting and world music in China. From my perspective, a conductor's work is both fascinating and terrifying. It is fascinating because they alone can shape music without themselves laying a finger on an instrument. It is terrifying because, in my limited experience on the podium, my nervous system has barely withstood the pressure of so many experienced musicians taking all of their cues from me. But it's a necessary job, and I'm grateful that there are those who share in my fascination without joining in my fear. In our conversation, we discussed a wide range of topics, including Brian's approach to learning and studying music, and his collaborations with composers, and the benefits that these collaborations confer on students. A couple of quick notes before we begin. First, this interview was recorded on Wednesday, October 24th. In the interview, we discuss in the future tense a concert which took place on Thursday, October 25th. Both of these dates precede the release of this interview. I simply did not have the time to edit this interview in the brief window separating our conversation and the concert the following day. So nobody listening will be able to share in our anticipation. Apologies. And the second note is that in the description of this video, there will be links to websites where you will be able to hear both the aforementioned concert as well as the album Kindred Spirits, which we discuss in depth in the following interview. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me today, Brian.
Thanks, Danny. It's a pleasure.
Before we get into questions about your career, let's talk a little bit about what brought us together today. So I live in Washington State, and I'm here visiting Oklahoma to hear a concert that is going to be taking place tomorrow. This concert includes a piece that I wrote, which will be a world premiere, but it also contains several other premieres as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you chose the other pieces on tomorrow's program?
Well, the idea of doing a concert of premieres really just came as a result of making the commitment and decision to do your piece as a world premiere. And so I thought, we've been part of many commissioning consortiums over the last several years, especially even during the pandemic. Several composers were contacting us, and when I say us, I'm talking about other college wind symphony conductors, mostly through College Band Directors National Association, CBDNA. And we get a lot of opportunities to join commissioning consortiums. Someone will champion a composer or champion a piece. And so we've done that over the last several years and had some pieces that were ready to perform, and I just hadn't had a concert to put them on. So I just thought I'd put all the premieres on the same concert. So that's kind of how this idea came to be.
The piece I wrote is called Elegy. Who are the other composers and what are their pieces?
Well, we're doing a piece by Stephen Grick called Stone Colors. I was personally part of that commissioning consortium. It was written kind of in memoriam or as a tribute to Eric Rombach Kendall, a friend who was at University of New Mexico for many years, and also a prolific champion of new music who worked with many composers. So he had worked with Stephen on several pieces. So Stephen was approached and asked if he would write a piece in memoriam. And this kind of came about as a result of that. It's the Oklahoma premiere, not the world premiere. And it is about the rising and setting sun and how it changes colors over across a canyon or a desert landscape. It's really quite an interesting piece of music. We're also doing two pieces that are transcriptions of earlier Wynton Marsalis works that came out of kind of a failed commission with Jim Spinazzola up at Cornell University. But these two pieces are really interesting, a lot of fun, and my students have had a blast learning and getting ready to perform them. And we're also doing a piece by Tyler Harrison called Como Cannons, which he wrote as a standalone piece before he decided to write his Symphony #2, kind of around themes that are presented in Como canons. But it's about the perfect length to close out this concert.
Stone Colors, that's the title of the piece, correct?
Right.
Is that programmatic element detectable in timbral shifts or melodic lines or harmonic contours?
I would think so. Definitely programmatic, and the music definitely tells a story. Stephen does a great job, like you, of incorporating a lot of motivic and textural and structural elements that are, I think, so clearly defined that even a listener will hear the shape and the colors, timbral colors of the piece that tell the story of the movements. You know, there's a early morning, mid-afternoon, and late evening, and he actually goes into detail in the program notes about the shifting colors and what colors he sees and feels and hears.
Great. I'm looking forward to hearing that. I got a chance to hear Tyler's piece yesterday during rehearsal, which was a very fun experience, but I had not yet heard that work. So you said that you were contacted over the pandemic by composers. The pandemic was a challenging and uncertain period for everyone. How did you feel taking on projects and thinking about programming ahead during those uncertain times?
I don't know. I just think that we all were in a situation where we had to continue to focus on the fact that we would get past the pandemic, that we would get back to a point where we could all be in the same room together, where musicians could sit near one another again and share air and share breath and feel one another moving in unison or moving in collaborative ways. I just had to maintain hope that we were going to be able to, just rejoin each other in making music. Conductors can't make music by ourselves. We have to have ensembles and colleagues and collaborators in order to make our music. It was just the only way, was to remain hopeful.
How long has it been since you've felt comfortable back in the classroom with a full room of players?
I felt comfortable with a full room of players the moment we were able to be vaccinated. For me, that was not an issue. It was never a political issue. It was just a way for us to be able to share space again and be near other people. So as soon as the vaccines came out and it was possible for people to do that, I was comfortable and ready to get back to work.
And at that point, was the school allowing you to rehearse, or was there some delay between your comfort zone and the school's comfort zone?
Well, actually, I was very fortunate to be in a position of an administrative role as the director of the school music. I was very, very involved in learning information as it became available about this virus that was kind of transforming the way we did things all across the world. And the more we learned about it, and the more we understood it, of course, the availability of the vaccines to keep us healthy. I think the timing for when administration was comfortable reopening and when I was comfortable was like coincidental, because it was me.
I want to know a little bit about your first musical experiences, what you played growing up, how you got into conducting, and how you decided to specialize in conducting for winds.
Wow. Well, that's a whole podcast right there. But when I was a little kid, my dad traveled some with his work, and he would bring me home toy trumpets, toy instruments. It was just a little thing that he did. And I would honk on those little toy trumpets, but I would also really figure out how to play melodies or tunes. We had one of those old-fashioned big console stereos, and my dad would play albums. And I would just kind of, as a little toddler, sway back and forth in front of the stereo system when my dad was playing records, and I played along. And so I just kind of always knew I was going to be a trumpet player because I really liked that. When I got into the fourth grade in Georgia, I grew up in DeKalb County, Georgia. I went to DeKalb County schools, and strings were allowed to start in the fourth grade, but band, for some reason, we had to wait until the fifth grade. So I went to the principal when I was in the fourth grade and said, I feel like this is discriminatory and I want an opportunity to start my instrument in the fourth grade. So I did. I got to start a year early in band with all the fifth graders. I was successful. It gave me a lot of joy. It gave me a lot of pride. It gave me a lot of self-confidence. And music changed my life. It made me feel like I mattered. And so I've always wanted to be in music, and I guess I've always wanted to be able to give those feelings to other people who play an instrument or want to make music in any way. So that's kind of how I went into music, high school band, college music major, teaching certificate. I decided to be a conductor when I was working on my master's degree at Notre Dame in trumpet performance. I would take lessons in Chicago, which is about an hour and a half drive around the tip of Lake Michigan from South Bend, Indiana, to get into Chicago. But I would take lessons with Will Scarlett, who was the associate principal in the Chicago Symphony. And he had a studio in his basement. Notre Dame paid him to teach me adjunct. On the days that he had a concert, I would take my lessons in the afternoon, would go to dinner together, ride the L train downtown, and I'd go to a concert with Sir George Schulte conducting the Chicago Symphony. And then on the days when they had rehearsals, I'd take my lesson in the morning and we'd eat lunch together, and I'd ride downtown with him and get to watch rehearsals. They were usually closed rehearsals, but I was very, very quiet, and the orchestra manager let me sit in the very back of the hall as long as I made no sound at all. And I would check out scores from the Notre Dame library, and it was watching George Schulte rehearse the Chicago Symphony when I decided, I think this is what I really want to do.
You've made a couple mentions of orchestras. One was the fact that the orchestra was able to commence in fourth grade, and one was that you got to watch the Chicago Symphony. And was there ever a point when you considered either conducting or specializing as a trumpet player in orchestral music rather than winds?
Oh, sure. I think going into my master's degree, like so many competent and qualified trumpet players, I felt like, that my life might evolve a little bit around taking auditions and going to play where I could play, or teaching at a university as an applied teacher. But I really was moved by watching Schulte conduct. And I was very fortunate to have great mentors and conductors in the band world growing up. So it was very easy for me to make the decision that I wanted to be a conductor, and band was where I was going to conduct, specifically wind ensemble, wind symphony music, one player on a part. I think that years from now, people are going to call this period of history in music neo-romantic, because living composers are writing a great deal for wind ensembles, and conducting a wind ensemble is what gives me the opportunity to interact with living composers and new music. So it was a real conscious choice.
Great. I think that provides a good segue to get into some of the commissioning consortiums you've been in. So there were two commissioning consortiums that you've been involved in specific to this thread I want to pursue. One was in 2014, which resulted in Remember Me by David Maslanka. And the other one was in 2015, which resulted in High Songs by Carter Pan. And both of these feature a cello soloist. So were these instrumentation choices coordinated between the commissioning consortiums in any way, or was it a coincidence?
It wasn't a coincidence. It was really Tess Remy Schumacher is the cello professor at UCO, and in all the years I've been teaching, she's very much one of my favorite colleagues. We've collaborated on lots of projects together, and when I think of the CD and the recording project that I called Kindred Spirits, it was because she is definitely a kindred spirit. The first time I got to conduct in Carnegie Hall, it was with her and a chamber ensemble that was performing the Ibert cello concerto. Years later, we traveled Germany on a tour itinerary that she actually planned, and we performed on 2 subscription concert series that she was able to gain access to. She's always been a kindred spirit. She loves to play with my wind ensemble, and we love to have her play with the wind ensemble. And so I specifically commissioned Carter as the Carter Pan as the composer to write the high songs. The David Maslanka Remember Me was something that David wanted to do and contacted me because he knew of my relationship with Tess. And so he invited us to be part of that commissioning consortium as well.
I'm assuming you have a relationship or had a relationship with the late David Maslanka that extended sometime before the commissioning consortium.
Yeah, David was an amazing person. And I realized after his death that there were hundreds of conductors like me who thought we had this very, very special relationship with David. And it just turns out that he was such an incredible human being that he made everyone he ever worked with feel like they were special, and they had a really special connection with him and his music. It was life-changing for me. I'm still very sorry that he's no longer with us in physical presence on earth, but I know that he's very much with us in a very spiritual way.
The connection that you formed with him, was it largely the result of professional interactions, or did you really bond human to human in ways outside of the professional domain?
I think we bonded in very human ways outside of rehearsal. He and I exchanged emails about life and love and parenting and struggles and what makes life rich and what makes life important. And we had several deep religious / spiritual conversations where he was very straightforward and honest about his own journey. And he was very understanding of my own journey as well.
When did you first meet him, and when did this relationship begin?
I can tell you the very first moment I met him was in the lobby of the Lila Cockrell Theater in 1994 at the TMEA convention, when I heard the University of Texas Wind Ensemble perform his Symphony No. 4. We connected in the lobby that day and stayed in touch with each other consistently from then on. I knew of him before then, and I knew of his music before then, because I had been in the Texas Wind Symphony when Ray Lichtenwalter conducted us in a performance of In Memoriam, which was a piece by David Maslanka. So I knew of David and his music and had been aware of him, but that was the first time I met him personally. It was an instant connection.
He wrote Remember Me right around 2014. And so when he was writing this, was there much interaction between you and the other consortium members and him? Or did he write the piece and then afterwards send it to you guys? How did that collaboration work?
Well, he wrote the piece, and he always wrote very deep and meaningful program notes for his pieces. And he would often share in the program notes his impetus and his motivation and inspiration for the pieces. When David would deliver a piece of music, you would have all the background information that you would need in order to kind of climb inside that world and understand the perspective from which he was writing. So there was not a lot of interaction between all of the conductors who were part of the commissioning consortium and David, unless he would just touch base to let us know how it was going. But once it was over, I had him on campus, and he was here for what might have even been the second performance of the piece ever. It was not the world premiere, but it was definitely the Oklahoma premiere, and it might have been the second performance of the piece ever, with Tess performing the solo cello part.
Did Tess play in any of the other performances associated with the consortium, or did those conductors have cellists that they had in mind, or did they find cellists?
Tess later worked on a piano reduction with David so that she could perform the piece when there wasn't a wind ensemble around to cover all of the ensemble parts. So that was something that was really unique that came out of that consortium. But the other conductors and the other schools had their own cello soloists.
High Songs by Carter Pan came about around a year later. And by that time, did you already have in mind this record that you did called Kindred Spirits, which we'll talk in depth about shortly?
I don't know. It's hard to remember. I think the Kindred Spirits CD project came about because I wrote a grant and was able to get some money to cover the recording sessions. It was an on-campus UCO grant, and we've done that several times. I'm very appreciative that the UCO administration provides on-campus grant money for faculty in every discipline to be able to pursue their passion, and especially to be able to collaborate with students using those grant dollars. So that's always been a real special thing. And I can't remember, honestly, if the idea came about before or during the commissioning of High Songs, but I just knew that the way I felt about Tess was the same way I felt about Valery Kuleshov, who recorded the Stravinsky Concerto for Piano and Winds with us, about my dear friend Robert Glaubitz, who sang on the Norman Della Gioia Songs of Abelard. So yeah, I think the idea for Kindred Spirits just really evolved from there. The other thing is the artwork. You miss out on this with Apple Music and Spotify. People no longer hold the CD booklet in the case in their hands. Now everything's streaming, and I'm really grateful that our music can be out there on streaming platforms. But the person who designed all of our artwork for all of our CDs was also a kindred spirit, Amy Johnson. She was a colleague for many years in our School of Design, and she always came up with the most creative and stunning visual artwork for our CDs. And so I wanted to include her on that CD as well as a kindred spirit.
Okay, so you've mentioned the other pieces that were on Kindred Spirits. It was recording the UCO Wind Symphony, and it features 4 works for Wind Symphony and a variety of soloists. So how did you choose the Norman Della Gioia and Stravinsky pieces?
With Valery, it's just that he was an amazing soloist, and he is Russian, and he felt some type of kinship to this piece as well. We had played it years before in Carnegie Hall, and he said to me one day, "Brian, I want us to have the best recording in the world." So when Valery gets excited about a project, it's really easy for the people around him to get excited about a project as well. So that's how that became part of it. And I just looked for a piece that would really highlight the beautiful baritone qualities of Rob Glaubitz. And because I enjoy working with him so much, I also just wanted to have the opportunity to make music with him and the ensemble together.
How was the recording process for this project? Was it difficult to get the correct balance between not only the ensemble and the soloists, but the ensemble and the different types of soloists?
No, I used Jim Jackson, a dear friend out of Fort Worth, Texas, but Jim had also kind of apprenticed and learned from the late, very recently passed, the late, great Bruce Leak, who recorded all of the CDs for the North Texas and Cincinnati Conservatory groups that Eugene Corporon conducted. He was my mentor, my conducting teacher. And so I used Jim Jackson, and a lot of colleagues that I made friends with when I was at North Texas doing my studies there. Dennis Fisher came and did production, masterful listener and really creative with the headphones on. Brad Ginevro helped, and also Nick Williams from North Texas came up. We didn't record all 4 of these pieces at the same time. We had 4 different recording sessions over time, which is unlike some people and the way some projects are done. But we recorded at 4 different times, and I used multiple producers. But Jim he's an expert at where to put the microphones, exactly how to adjust the balances. It was nothing at all that I had to worry about. All I had to do was be on the podium and conduct. Jim took care of all of the sound production, and he was really capably assisted by Brian Mitchell, our recording engineer here at UCO. And then, a great producer in the booth will just tell you, hey, we don't have measure 3 with clarinets in tune yet, or we don't have a measure 73 with a clean attack from trumpets and horns on that unison G. So we'll have to go back and catch it. So a great producer and someone who really slates well just makes it easy for the conductor to just stand on the podium and conduct.
The recordings that we can hear on the CDs, were each of those a full take, or are they assemblages of the best takes of several run-throughs?
Some of them have very, very long takes in them, but some cuts and splices, some plugs. That's just the way it's done in the industry right now, and helps us get the very best presentation forward that we can.
That does seem like the ideal way to work. I'm a little bit surprised that the producers were able to convey the sound of one continuous take.
Well, I would do the post-production editing myself as far as deciding which takes and where to splice. And then Jim Jackson, of course, would do all of that actual work on the computer. It's an exhaustive process, but it's a comprehensive process. And it's one of those things that I'm so grateful that I learned how to do when I was at North Texas as a student. I can only just shout out to my teacher and mentor, Eugene Corporon. He really changed the entire world for wind band conductors with his contributions to the recording industry, and the sheer number of great recordings that his groups have produced over the years. And just you look at the fact that my UCO group did 5 important CDs that contribute to the repertoire, but I wouldn't have done that if he hadn't been my teacher. So not only did he have this really incredible recording output, but also he influenced so many of his students to do the same things, or to kind of walk in those big footprints of his and try to contribute as well.
Was the Kindred Spirits recording done at Mitchell Hall?
Yes, all of the pieces were recorded at Mitchell Hall on the stage.
So how long was it from the first time that the record button was hit until you had the final product?
Usually we would do this in a weekend. We would start on a Friday and be finished by Sunday evening.
And that's for all 4 of the pieces?
Yes, for each of the pieces. And for the previous recordings, same thing, about a weekend for the entire CD.
And so you've mentioned that you've done several recordings. And do you have like a dream recording, some sort of a theme or works you would want to include?
I don't right now. I know that when those projects come to mind, I'm real passionate about them. But what is most beneficial for me is the learning process that happens for my students when they record. It's amazing how much being involved in one of those recording sessions influences the way an ensemble member plays, listens, hears, interacts with others. And it's been a few years now since we've recorded a CD, so I would love for these current students to have that opportunity.
For you, raising the level of the students and exposing them to great music and composers, is that as important to you as your ability to interact with composers?
Absolutely. Like, for instance, you being on our campus right now this week, it's an opportunity for you to interact with them and for them to interact with you. And we have a dress rehearsal tonight, and I know that even at the dress rehearsal, we'll have more interaction and collaboration. It's going to be very interesting for them to watch how you and I have kind of revised and figured out how to experiment, tweak this or tweak that to kind of see how it might change the performance on Thursday night. So I think my students are going to be very interested in that process.
If you're listening to this and you are hearing bangs and pops, it's because we are in the middle of a thunderstorm. Well, we're undercover, but outside there is a thunderstorm that just started raging. We've been talking about Kindred Spirits. How can people listen to the Kindred Spirits album?
Well, that album and all of the other albums that we've recorded, the other 4 albums, are on Spotify, they're on Apple Music, they're on Amazon. I'm sure they're on YouTube Music. Wherever there's a streaming platform, we're part of that. You can also maybe find a hard copy still available on CD Baby or Amazon if anybody's still, an audiophile still collects CDs and likes to have those booklets. I love the information we used to be able to include about the performers, about the pieces, and about the composers in those booklets. I don't have any hard copies left, but perhaps they're available.
So most people only see a conductor in rehearsal or in performance, but there are only so many hours a week that you can rehearse and so many hours a month you can perform. The rest of your work, I'm assuming, is score study?
Yes.
How many hours of score study would you say go into an hour of rehearsal?
I would say, it just depends on the piece. It depends on how difficult it is. It depends on how much I'm learning. when I dive into a piece. It's like excavating in a dig, right? It's like the more you learn about a piece, the more you can find. And so eventually you're just down there with brushes and little toothpicks and stuff clearing away, an excavation that might have started with bulldozers or shovels, but, it just layer, and then finally you're diving down into this piece. But I would say just in general, probably I spend 2 hours of score study for at least every hour that I'm in rehearsal, at least.
And what are some of the things that you do to get yourself from that initial stage where you're using bulldozers to those final stages where you're using the brushes?
Just keep going. And the better the students do in rehearsals, the more it challenges me to have to stay ahead of them and to give them something to learn at the next rehearsal. So I go through and mark structural things. You mark the form, you mark the structure, you mark the variation and the growth. But I also mark things like cues, and I like to outline the dynamic contours and contrasts. You don't want to miss any rubatos or rallitandos or retards or accelerandos. You just don't want to take anything out of context from what the composer intended to be there. So, and you don't want to be in a situation where you're reading those things in a rehearsal. You want to know the piece, know the roadmap completely. So I also believe, like Frank Battisti used to say, that just the physical act of touching every accent, of touching every phrase marking, of touching every dynamic, it helps put that music indelibly into your brain. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, what's your favorite piece?" It's almost always whatever I'm working on right now. My favorite piece is almost always one of the pieces or all of the pieces that I'm conducting in a rehearsal, preparing for a concert.
Going back just a little bit, did you have really positive interactions with the composers after you played their works? And now I'm going back to Pan and Miss Slomka. What was your interaction with them like after you gave the performances?
Wonderful. It's very rewarding when you're able to bring a piece to life in a way that makes composers happy or delighted. And those are some of the richest, most amazing memories that I have in my entire career. I remember a time when, Michael Colgrass had done his own score. He scored for winds and strings also, a couple of string players, the Goldberg variations. He did it as a gift to his wife, Ulla Colgrass, because Ulla was great friends with Glenn Gould. And so Michael decided he would score the Goldberg variations for Ulla's 60th birthday. And he wrote them out for her. And when he was going to come to UCO to visit us, he was already 80 years old. And I had asked him for suggestions on different pieces, and I kept coming back to the Goldberg variations, and he said, "Please don't do that piece. Please don't do that piece. It doesn't work. I've had some negative experiences with that piece, even with professional orchestras." But I knew that I had a group of faculty and students here at UCO that would collaborate together. And I also knew that there was some interesting score study to be done there. I mean, when I opened that score and look at it, I immediately saw multiple pairings of the right hand, 2 pairs for each right hand passage, 2 pairs for each left hand passage. And I saw Glenn Gould's personality coming out in the way that he would interact with Ulla. And one of the just most rewarding moments in my entire career was when Michael Colgrass heard us perform that piece in the dress rehearsal. He said, "That's what I knew it would sound like, but I just never heard it before." And he wrote about it on his blog, on his website, and that's great. I've enjoyed interacting with Carter Pan, with David Maslenka, with Susan Botti came here to do Cosmosis. We've got a great composer on our own faculty, Sam McGrill. He's been a fantastic colleague and composer to work with over the years. Now I get to meet you and have you on campus just because we're going to do this piece, and that's great. Michael Doherty's been here. Just so many really wonderful Grammy-winning and Pulitzer Prize-winning composers that are so approachable and human, and they've become great friends.
I think that's something that's great about the wind ensemble is it's so receptive to new composers. I used to play the tuba. I played in the university wind ensemble and wind symphony, and we were always playing music by new composers, and occasionally we had them visit campus as well. It's like a living ensemble. It's almost like the Wild West, I think, of music ensembles.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a conscious choice to become involved and immerse myself in a wind ensemble repertoire. It's a living, breathing, changing, developing thing. I mean, as I say that, there's this incredible music in the wind repertoire that goes back now for, hundreds of years. Yeah, even Mozart, Beethoven, they wrote for harmony music. They wrote for wind groups. So there's just this rich, you go all the way back to Gabriele and St. Mark's and the wind music that he wrote, antiphonally there. There's just this rich heritage, and the wind ensemble kind of pulls it all together. You can play this reach your car from the Rococo or the pre-Baroque or the Renaissance, and you can play the Lincolnshire Posy with one player on a part, and you can play the Stravinsky symphonies of wind instruments, and there's just so much.
Have you played in their original form any older pieces, perhaps by Gabriele?
Sure, absolutely. I've enjoyed putting those on many concerts. In fact, on our next concert, we're going to be doing the Florence Schmidt Dionysiacs, written in 1913, I think it was. Anybody who's listening to the podcast, you can check me. It was close to 1913. It was just nothing like that piece before it happened. It was brand new. I mean, we hear about Stravinsky's Rite of Spring and how innovative and different it was. I can only imagine that Florence Schmidt's Dionysiacs was met with the exact same surprise.
So we're going to switch topics, and this is something that I read about you on your CV, and it's something I really want to know a little bit more about, and that is the time that you spent teaching in China.
My first trip to China was simply to go over to represent the university. The dean of the College of Education here, Jim Mackle, who was a great mentor and friend for many years, and still is, I count him as just very influential in my life, had an opportunity to send someone from our College of Education over to South China Normal University for the celebration of the 80th anniversary of their school, because the university had some type of relationship for exchange students with South China Normal University. And the director of the School of Music at UCO at the time, Keith White, sent me over early and introduced me to friends that he had at the Shanghai Conservatory in Guangzhou. And so I met people at Shanghai, I met people in Guangzhou. I traveled on a subsequent trip to Beijing and met people at other partnership universities. And really, those initial trips, I would just do master classes. I would work with instrumental students. I would coach them in small ensembles. The way the Chinese people do some of their instruction is a little bit opposite of the way we do. My students have several ensemble rehearsals a week and one applied lesson. But in China, they have several individual applied lessons a week and sometimes only one ensemble rehearsal. So it's much harder to make initial progress in those ensemble rehearsals. And it's also hard to maybe schedule one if you're in town for a couple of days, but it's not the day that they're going to have rehearsal. So sometimes I would work with them in small groups. Sometimes I'd have the opportunity to get in front of a group. Eventually, I made several conductor friends over there who would arrange trips for me to come over when I could specifically work with bands, school-age bands or orchestras.
Have you given conducting lessons or conducting workshops to up-and-coming conductors?
Several conducting workshops with promising and developing Chinese conductors. But this past June, I actually had the opportunity to teach beginning conducting in 4 sections of 20 to over 100 students. It was quite rewarding and really challenging.
What were some of the challenges?
Language. I always have to work with a translator when I'm over there. My Chinese Mandarin is very limited. They're so much better at English than we are at Chinese. And so you have to work with an interpreter. That's the biggest challenge. But also, there's just a lot of people. So those are big classes. And in 4 weeks' time, to try to spend individual one-on-one time coaching and in a masterclass setting, with over 100 students. It's exhausting.
Did you spend the majority of your time, would you say, on matters of score study, or were they like more on the physical aspect, like conveying clear gestures?
Well, this was a beginning conducting class, so you have to immediately start to let them understand that you're developing the craft of conducting, but you're also trying to get their brains to start thinking about the art of conducting. So score study, interpretation, that's always part of it. I don't want students to be making physical conducting gestures that are disconnected from a musical thought or a musical idea, because that's just choreography. That's just practicing movement in space. At the same time, the movement that they practice has to be clear. Like you said, there has to be clarity. An ensemble has to know exactly when to breathe, exactly when to play, exactly when to sing. So we teach the art and the craft, these two tracks of conducting, kind of side by side, a little bit simultaneously. We can split them just to say, I want you to think about this right now, but now let's go back and put it in context of this. And you kind of go back and forth between the two tracks that way.
Would you say that you were able to detect a noticeable difference in their abilities from the beginning of the course to the end?
Absolutely. It was very rewarding because the students were so responsive as well. And also, by the end of the time that I was there, a lot of the Chinese faculty members, they're very competent and really wonderful musicians. But they started coming and watching my class because, some of our American teaching techniques are different. Chinese professors are able, it's highly competitive to get into college in China. And so there are limited places available, and the students realize that they have a coveted, treasured, competitive spot in college. So they take very seriously the fact that if a professor or an instructor gives them information, that they're required to take that information and learn it and retain it. So that understanding of here's the content and you're responsible for knowing it is very, very strong in the Chinese university. And I have a lot of respect for the teachers and the students because of that. However, you can't just give them information and talk about conducting. You have to show them how to conduct. And then when they don't necessarily move the way they feel that they're moving, or when the appearance of the gesture doesn't look like they might feel like it looks, you have to be able to touch their hand, hold the stick, help them develop muscle memory and body mapping in a way that communicates clear gesture. And it's really great when they do it because we know it's not verbal communication. It's definitely a nonverbal gestural art. And the fact that we had language barriers actually made the accomplishment of that more meaningful when it happened.
And so when you came back to the States to conduct, did you notice yourself trying to incorporate any more of the nonverbal kinds of teaching methods that you had developed in China?
I wouldn't say probably more so than I normally would, maybe just more aware of it.
Not relating specifically to the conducting workshops you gave, but to any of the activities you did over there. Did you notice them playing any repertoire that you were unfamiliar with, or that maybe you had encountered but seemed to be more popular over there than over here?
Oh, well, any type of music in another culture, you're going to hear things that you're not familiar with. There's just a cultural element of even just hearing them practice or sing or hum folk songs. We're walking down the street. It's a folk song. It's a culture that I'm not very familiar with. But I had a wonderful opportunity one evening to go to a Chinese orchestra concert where you hear air hooves, and we heard pipas and just so many different Chinese bamboo flutes, different wind organs, double reed wind organs. I had the opportunity to hear some really incredible music as the Chinese students and some faculty played on their traditional Chinese instruments.
Did that meld in any way with the wind music that they play over there?
Well, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to hear just wind ensemble music in China during this past trip. When I have gone in previous trips and I've conducted ensembles there, they play European and American repertoire right now, at least in the band world. There's a lag behind, right? But Chinese composers are now starting to realize, oh, the band medium is growing in China, so they're going to write for the band medium. And there are phenomenal Chinese composers writing for these traditional Chinese orchestras. So it's just a matter of transference for them to be able to write for wind band.
Thanks for sharing your experiences on those trips. We should be getting ready to head to rehearsal pretty soon. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I just like to know what your experience has been hearing your piece being performed by a large ensemble, and then how does it affect you wanting to make any changes or edits or tweaks? How's that been for you?
It's been interesting. The larger the ensemble you write for, the bigger the chance for some sort of miscalculation in sound. So in rehearsal yesterday, I was watching you make adjustments to the performance, to the approaches that the performers were making, and I was aware of that, but I was also looking at my score to see where maybe I had erred in some choices. I think we had a great conversation after that rehearsal where I suggested maybe some changes, considering tinkering with like some octaves that performers were playing in to try and get a better sound out of, a given passage. Can I adjust the playing technique? So there was a passage that had some harp harmonics, and in rehearsal I said, let's try that without harmonics. And I think that's just a normal thing for a composer to always keep an eye and ear on. The great composers of the past would always make revisions to their works after hearing them live. It's just, there's too much to manage as far as like orchestration to expect that every single detail is going to be on point without, hearing it workshopped by a group.
Right. Well, you think of Haydn at Esterhazy, he had the court musicians right there. That was the beauty of the patronage system, is that they were just interacting in rehearsal, right? Constantly revising. And what we hear today is his final version. So I really think it's neat that the students are going to see tonight the results of your growth and listening and your critical listening skills with your own piece of music. I'm excited about the dress rehearsal because I'm excited about some of these tweaks and changes that we're going to make to the piece. And I'm glad that some of them are experimental, that we're presenting them in a way it's like, let's see what it sounds like if we do this, and then let's make a choice. Because now the students are collaborators as well, and they're kind of part of that decision-making process, which, if this is a great way to tie it together, brings me right back to the very reason that I absolutely love to bring composers to campus to interact with my students, because that level of collaboration is really what makes music magic.
I'm looking forward to the rehearsal tonight and the concert tomorrow. Thanks. It's been a great talk.
Thanks. I always enjoy getting to visit with composers.